In this video, I want to talk to you about the stool. We got a completed stool here. It's a serviceable stool. It's going to lift your feet up at the end of the day and make you feel better. However, it doesn't really look like furniture, does it? It kind of looks sort of like a shipping crate or a pallet or something like that. And that's because this doesn't have any refinement added to it yet. Now, in this case, because we're building this footstool in the most basic and simple way, I didn't do the sanding and refinement and things that I would normally do during construction. I wouldn't have put this stool together with the wood in this condition. So what we're going to do later is take this all apart and refine it. But before we do that, I just want to point out why this doesn't look like furniture. And I mean, the first reason is because the wood's kind of rough. And you can see it here. We've got planer marks. You can see them, the lines here. That's because this surface was formed by a series of scallops, a series of curved moves from a planer, thickness planer, that turned it from rough lumber to smooth lumber, or planed lumber it's called, but it's still not all that smooth, at least not for furniture use. So we got that. We've got some tearing of the wood here. The grain was running in one direction and the thickness planer was running in the other, so it caused that tearing. It's dirty. Some of the corners are dented a little bit. This is all completely normal, by the way. We didn't do any mistakes, and if your footstool looks like this, you didn't do any mistakes either. This is just the way lumber looks until you refine it. Another issue here is the sawn edge. This is about as smooth as you can get a sawn edge with a handsaw, but it's still not nearly smooth enough for interior furniture use. Also, we've got the factory edge here, very slightly rounded, and then the edge here quite crisp. So that's no good. You have pencil lines. All of these things I'm going to show you how to refine away, and then you can decide for yourself how fancy and smooth and refined you want your stool to be. There is, I would call it a semi-structural problem that your footstool almost certainly has. Mine does, and it's a wobble. So refinement involves dealing with the surfaces, but before we get that far, we got to fix the wobble, because nobody wants a wobbly footstool. And we're going to do that using a process called scribing. I've done my best in this course to create a project and to put it together in such a way that you'd be exposed to techniques and challenges and approaches and ways of thinking that will apply to all kinds of woodworking. And scribing is a very powerful technique that you can use in all kinds of situations. So now I need to go over to a truly flat surface so we can make sure that we're getting rid of the wobble in the stool and we're not compensating for any kind of a twisted floor. So you'll have to find what you believe to be a flat surface. That could be, I don't know, a kitchen counter. It could be a floor if it's flat. It could be different things, but right now I'm going to go over to my table saw, which is the flattest, handiest surface I have in my workshop right now, and we're going to do the scribing over there. So sure enough, I've put the stool on a very flat surface, my table saw, and we've still got a wobble. It's extremely likely. Count yourself very fortunate if your footstool doesn't have a wobble when you first put it together, because the slightest difference in angle from one leg to the other, that's going to make a wobble. So the first step to scribing that wobble away is to stabilize the footstool so it doesn't rock, and we need to use some sort of a wedge. These are plastic wedges meant for building and cabinet installation and things like that. Anything will do. You can just jam cardboard under there, or if you've got a wooden wedge, you can use that. But essentially what we want to do is we want to put the wedges in so that half the error is here on this side and then half is over on the other side. Because this is the high side here on one side, and this is the high side over here. When there's a wobble, it's always diagonal. If you had sort of, this was a high side and that was a high side, well, you wouldn't have a wobble necessarily. the footstool would just tip over a little bit and it would be stable. So wobble always indicates some kind of a problem on opposite corners. And so we'll put a wedge in here, kind of split the difference, and put the wedge in there. Now, we're solid as a rock with the wedges in place. That's step one. This is where the actual scribing comes in. I'm just using a regular pencil. And if you'll notice, when I put the pencil down on anything, the tip is raised a little bit. Now, what is that? That's probably 3/16 of an inch or so. And that's key, because what I can do now is I can put this pencil down here, and I can simply trace. Now, did you notice something there? The pencil line shows more wood over here at this end, right here, than it does over here. In fact, there's almost no wood below the pencil line here. If I can remove wood from this leg accurately, right up to the pencil line and not beyond, and I can do the same thing on the other side because I'm going to scribe it. If I can remove the wood right to those lines, I will have a stable footstool. And so I'm just going to go around and do all of the sides now. Now I can't do it here because the wedge is here, but I can kind of rotate it out of the way. Not that I really need to mark it here necessarily. The mark on the side is the most important one, because that's what I'm going to be removing wood to. So how do you suppose I'm going to remove the wood I need to? See, more wood here, less wood here. Not a whole lot on this side, but quite a bit more on that side. If I can bring the wood of both legs down to that pencil line precisely, I'm going to have a solid stool. This isn't a whole lot of wood, so I can't saw it. I can't use the hand saw. I might be able to use a power saw, but that's tricky and it can be dangerous. What I'm going to use is my edge sander, which is a nice big, very, very handy stationary machine that you certainly won't have yet. You might get one sooner or later. There are smaller versions than the one I'm going to be showing you. But you don't have that. You don't even have a small one. So how do you deal with that? Well, I'll just show you. This is the hand saw method, we'll call it. Instead of just relying on the natural distance between one of the flats on this pencil and the tip of the lead, so that 3/16 of an inch or whatever, that the tip is raised above the wood. Instead of relying just on that, I'm going to park the pencil on a piece of wood. That raises the pencil. And now, when I scribe, you can see here, now when I scribe, my scribe line is going to be much higher. It's going to be much higher. Actually, I just grabbed this scrap. I could have probably gotten a little bit thinner scrap. I don't really need to go this much higher. But the idea is that instead of by removing just the minimum amount of wood, which is what I scribed to before, I'm now making a mark that's sufficiently high that I could cut this with a handsaw. The problem is I can't cut that with a handsaw because there won't be wood on both sides of the blade to guide it. So the blade is simply just going to wander away from that line if I tried to saw it. But here it's different. I can saw to that line, and there's going to be wood on both sides of the cut, and the saw blade will be contained and it will work well. So that's the way you can do it, even if all you have is a handsaw. But now let's go over to the edge sander. I'm going to show you how I do this, and then we'll bring the stool back and see how we did. let's see how we've done. Rock solid and no wedges. Scribing works amazingly well. And if you've done scribing like this, or if you ever do it in your career, and you scribe once and you get the wood down to the line, and then you try it out, and there's still a little bit of wobble, no problem, just scribe again. And it just means you didn't get the lines quite right, or maybe you removed too much wood on one side. Easily fixed. And we got a rock solid stool that's now worth refining, because there's no point in putting a furniture grade finish on something that's going to wobble. Now, let's just say that you happen to own a belt sander. A belt sander is a handheld sanding power tool. It's one of my recommended tools if you're building up your collection. And you can use a handheld belt sander to do the same job that I just did with my stationary edge sander. And that just involves clamping the stool to a solid surface so that it doesn't move around, and then holding the belt sander below your eye level and moving it back and forth and working back to the line that way. It's a freehand operation, so it's a little bit more skill dependent than what I showed you on the stationary edge sander, but it works really well, and it will also offer the benefit of smoothing the bottom of the legs too. So just one more little tip before I go. And as I said, this might not apply to you immediately, but chances are pretty good that you'll get a belt sander eventually. That's what this thing is here. And you of course, you want to spend as little as possible on abrasive belts. This is a replaceable belt. You can flip a lever, take it off, put on another one. These belts come in different grit ratings, just like sheet sandpaper does. But the thing that stops them from working most often is that the pores, so the spaces, the valleys between the abrasive particles, get clogged with sawdust. This one isn't too bad, but when you're working with softwood, it can get really bad because the sawdust mixes with the resins and forms a kind of a hard, impervious layer. So the sanding belt and its abrasives could still be good, but it can't really sand because the spaces are all plugged up. The solution to that is this thing. This is what's called crepe rubber, C-R-E-P-E. It's a French word. I don't know why they call it that, but it's a soft rubber, and think of it as an eraser. It's kind of like a big eraser, except instead of erasing pencil marks, it erases sawdust and resin from belts. So you just kind of turn it on. I'll tell you first. I'll turn it on and then hold this against the spindling belt, and you're gonna be amazed, I think, at how clean this gets. Let me show you. Look at that. Almost as good as new. You can triple, quadruple, maybe even more the life of a belt with a block like this. And this block, even with heavy use in a woodworking shop almost every day, it's going to last for years. So just something to keep in mind for the future.